Greetings, everybody. Nick DiVirgilio here, and welcome back to my podcast, So You Want to Be a Musician. I'm sitting here in the beautiful Palace Theatre in Newark, UK, not far from Nottingham. Big Train just did a blinding gig here last night. It was absolutely fantastic, and this place is just really cool. So I thought I would introduce this episode of the podcast, sitting in these seats. And I'm excited about my guest for this podcast. It's my dear old friend, Randy McStine. I've known Randy since about 2009 when Randy reached out to me by email asking if I'd be interested in maybe playing drums on a song or two for his first solo record. And he sent me the demo, and it was great. I realized that right off the bat, just listening to this guy's voice and the way he played guitar, even back then. I jumped at the chance. I ended up, I think, mixing most of the record and playing on a lot of it, and it was just a super cool thing to be involved with, and then our relationship built from there. And Randy truly is one of the most talented guys I've ever known. The dude is an amazing guitar player, great singer and songwriter, and he's been working his butt off for many years. He knows what it takes to be a musician. He's been through, all of it. And he's had this career that's, the way he describes it in the podcast, you'll hear it, it's sort of like this slow burn. He's decided he wanted to be a solo musician, a solo artist, releasing his own music. And doing that could take a long time to get, not just recognized, but appreciated. Just getting your music out there with all the noise of all the music that's put out on a daily basis. And he's persevered through it in a big way. And then over the last number of years, Randy has finally started to get the attention he deserves as a musician by playing in the band Porcupine Tree. That gig was a big one for him, meeting Steven Wilson and getting involved with that crew, because it's getting him out there in front of a lot of new people to just not only recognize how great of an artist he is, but just to hopefully get more people into the music that he creates also. It's a really good story. Randy has been opening up for the band Pineapple Thief on a number of occasions. I think he has another tour coming up, and he's also going to be on Steven Wilson's solo tour next year in 2025. So things are really looking up for Randy, and it is totally deserved. So if you don't know his music or know who Randy is, I would encourage you to go check it out and dive in even more. Okay, with that said, if you're watching or listening to this podcast on YouTube, I thank you very much. Please subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcast or Podbean or Spotify, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Follow the podcast, and without further ado, my conversation with Randy McStine. Cheers. Greetings, everybody. Nick DiVirgilio. Welcome back to my podcast, So You Want to Be a Musician, and my guest today is my good buddy, Mr. Randy McStine. Sir.
Good, sir.
How are you, man?
Good. How are you?
Good. You're hanging out in your music room at your pad downstairs?
As are you?
Yeah. You got a little great hang there, and we had some fun jamming there not too long ago. We got to do that again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. It's opened up a lot more since you were here last, so I'm constantly tweaking things.
Of course, I believe me, I know that. You know that well. Well, hey man, we're here to chat about what it's like to be a musician. I've known you for a long time, from when you were just getting started. We worked on your first solo record together a little bit, and you've gone through a lot of changes in your musical career since I first met you. And I ask all my guests, the first question I ask everybody is, it's kind of a broad one, a deep question, but I think it's a cool way to start out the podcast because everybody answers this question so differently, and it's really interesting to hear the answers. So that first question is this: Randy McStine, do you need to play music to be happy?
Ooh. Yeah, I think I do. It's that's actually, that is deep, and it's hard to answer. You can get really micro with what is happiness and all that kind of stuff. But without going down that road so much, I just think music is just something that it's been in my life as long as I can remember. And there was such a premium placed on listening to music and appreciating musicians and reading liner notes and all that stuff that I grew up around, and my earliest memories kind of revolve around it. So it's really was like my first love before sports or anything else as a kid. And that remains, to this day. So I think like another way of thinking about it, I've asked myself, if I were to lose my sight or my hearing, which would I rather lose? And I always say the sight. I think it would be really painful to not be able to, hear music anymore.
Yeah, I'm in Mr. Big, doing that show, and Paul Gilbert is kind of famously, one of the greatest
Yes.
guitar players ever. Sort of famously is sort of known now of his. He's got a lot of hearing loss, and
Yes. Yeah.
somehow he's still able to make the level of music and keep that level of musicianship when he can't hear as good anymore. It's such a trip to think about.
Oh, it's amazing. You would never know if you didn't,
Right.
by listening to him. Yeah.
So no, that's great. I appreciate the way you answered that question because everybody's so different. It seems like everybody needs music to be happy, just at different levels.
Right.
Musicians that chose to make this a profession. So when did you? Well, you sort of answered it, but when you were younger, when did you know that music was going to be your life's passion? You're like you wanted to make a career out of it, that kind of
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll take it back and try not to ramble too much. So what I was saying, like, there are very early childhood pictures of me, um, like picking up household objects like rakes and tennis rackets, whatever, and turning them sideways and strumming them. I was very fortunate that um, my dad in particular was a huge music fan, and he had a lot of this is growing up in the early 90s. He had a lot of VHS like concert films and stuff.
Okay.
And he would have his buddies over and they would hang out and drink beers and like watch this stuff and talk about it. So I was always watching all of this. And he was really into rock music in general, and guitar was like his instrument. He didn't play, but he gravitated towards it.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I was sort of like basically raised to be a guitar player first and foremost, and I just found the whole imagery and the whole swagger and all that stuff. Of course, I couldn't vocalize that as a 4 or 5 year old, but I think that just it got in there really deep, and around, yeah, right after I turned 6 years old, like a week later, I saw my first concert, which was Yes, at the arena in town. And my parents got like front row center seats. Wow. And it was like this mind-blowing experience. And from 1994 to like 96, with progressive rock bands in particular, they were all kind of making these reunion laps. So I got to see Yes twice. I saw King Crimson. I saw Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Jethro Tull, like all between the age of 6 and 8.
And you remember these concerts pretty vividly?
In bits.
Yeah.
As the years have gone on, I remember less, but the impression, just it got its hooks in there deep.
Sure.
And I got my first guitar, an electric guitar, a Fender Lead 2, when I was 5 years old, and I kind of flailed around with it for about a year, and then I started taking lessons. And somewhere between like the age of 6 and 9, this vocabulary started to emerge. I was starting to form, licks and bluesy kind of things. And like by the age of 10, 11, I was out kind of jamming with local bands that would allow me to sit in, kind of thing. My dad would kind of go around and say like, hey, my son's, he's really good. Could he play a couple of tunes? And it was always like this kind of skeptical, oh yeah, sure, kind of thing. And then I would go up there and people would say, wow. And so it kind of evolved from there. And I can't remember like a definitive moment to really answer your question where I said like, this must be my career. It just kind of evolved into that. And then one day I was just like a gigging musician practically every weekend from like 6th grade till, well, all through high school and post high school and that kind of stuff, so.
Sure. So during that time as a younger player, getting out there and meeting other players and other musicians and doing the gigs and stuff. What did you learn about being a musician? What was dealing with other people and kind of, navigating those early waters of people wanting you to come back again, like going out and playing and then you getting the call to come back and do it again, that kind of stuff. What did you learn about that?
Well, I was always, and still am to a great degree, a really shy kid. And, my dad was, I mean, by default, kind of like my manager, you could say. And he would kind of set these things up. He would call people, and he knew local musicians from, just back in the day, hanging out in bars and stuff. As a matter of fact, when I went to that Mr. Big show that you guys did in Buffalo, New York, I was talking to Billy about this particular club that he used to play in my hometown called Popeyes. Like, just those were the days when bands were playing in bars, basically 7 nights a week, and it was a thriving thing. But anyways, by the time I was like 11, 12 years old, this is basically like 1999 to 2000 was when I really started getting out there. And basically what happened is I started out sitting in with some bands. Like my guitar teacher had a band, and I would go to their gigs. And first it was like I would play 3 tunes, and then I would just sit in on a set. And I didn't even really know these songs. It was all really by ear to just find filler spots. I had no interest in playing rhythm as a kid. Right. It was all like, I just want to play like bluesy guitar solos, And but from that, it was sort of like the opinion like, oh, this kid should have his own band. He should be out there doing his own thing. And I didn't write music yet, and it was all cover band central. So the next step was to find older musicians to back me up, essentially, and just kind of go through the classic rock canon and learn all this stuff from scratch. So it was like Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan, Robin Trower, ZZ Top, like all the classic guitar stuff. And I would say what I learned is, like, you have your first band and you have no experience about other players, so you kind of accept whatever it is that they do. And then I sort of like graduated to like a better cover band, like the really kick-ass cover band in town. Right. And we had a singer who could, do Deep Purple and Kansas and Journey and all that kind of stuff, Boston, killer keyboard player. And that was really inspiring because it was like, I could immediately feel the difference about how it felt and how it sounded, like the quality of the musicians. And I was starting to hear sounds in front of me that I thought only existed on records, because I hadn't had the experience of being with other people who could make those sounds. It's like, wow, that guy can sound just like John Lord playing Highway Star. This is amazing. And essentially having to learn these difficult cover tunes by ear, I don't know, somehow I made it happen and became like this, local prodigy kid that everybody wanted to go see, bang out these tunes. And it's radical that I think about it now, and questionable, I'm sure, for most parents, that, I was out in bars till like 2 a.m. every weekend as a 12-year-old kid, doing like a standard 10 to 2 gig, like 3 sets of music, practically every weekend. And, and it's weird because you also start to realize like there are musicians who even have like jealousies and different, just that kind of stuff. I grew up very fast. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that's cool. So what did you learn about the human side of these other players? You're so young, you're out there playing, and you're playing with adults. I imagine, what were the age range of some of these guys in the band? Up to like 40 years old or younger or something like that?
Yeah, I would say at youngest, it would be like around the age I am now, which I just turned 36. So it'd be like maybe early to mid 30s,
right,
up to, let's say late 40s, early.
Wow, okay. So what did you learn about human beings. I mean, you had such from a kid at that age,
Yeah.
showing up to play. You just want to play music and do your thing and relish the moment of musically. What did you learn about the human aspect of the people you were playing with?
If I think back to it, I think, you know, at a certain point, they stopped treating me like a kid and started just treating me like anybody else. You know, obviously I'm not out in the bars drinking and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's um, nothing nefarious going on. Like I just showed up, played the gig and all that stuff. Um, but yeah, it became a very by proxy, just an adult environment. And I would say to that point, not so much about the musicians, but just about the culture of putting on a consistent show, like knowing your parts, being good, trying to entertain an audience, even though I was completely in a shell. I would basically just kind of close my eyes and play and just try to be in the zone. I had no stage presence whatsoever. It was just all just about connecting with the music and the musicians. But like, you know, improv chops and being able to think on your feet, like if, you know, if the arrangement didn't go exactly like it was planned at a certain point, like this band that I was with in particular, we didn't really rehearse. We just kind of played so much that we knew all the tunes and kind of call the songs and just kind of go into it. So it was really like just kind of hit the ground running stuff, which I think really set me up for, you know, a particular set of skills that have really been beneficial down the line. But I would say like being in the bar environment, uh, it could go either way, right? Because I mean, you're around the elements. But I pretty early on, I was very observant, and I would just encounter very drunk people, and I was like, I don't. This isn't for me. Like when I become an adult, I know that's not going to be my thing, you know.
Sure.
So it was an interesting education. You know, you could say like I almost like went to school like 10 years or so before most people would kind of get into that.
Yeah, that's really cool. So would you relay that as like advice to a younger player to coming up, you know, uh, you started young, you
Yeah.
got there and just did it, you know. Thankfully you had parents that were supportive of you, obviously, that wanted you to do it. Um, so if you were going to sort of a newcomer, so like how to get started,
Yeah.
did that really help? I mean, can you relay those kinds of those things to younger players if they
I
ask?
would, I would, but I mean, you and we've talked about this before. Like, I feel like an old man when I encounter younger musicians, just because the whole concept of being a musician in a lot of ways has really shifted in the social media age.
Yeah.
I mean, like YouTube was just starting to be a thing, like when I was in high school and still out playing gigs every weekend, and that was still like, you know, when my band would take these trips to New York City, like 3 hours each way to play a gig at the bitter end and hope that, you know, some record company guy showed up or whatever, you know, those kind of romantic notions of the old way of doing things. And it was changing right under my feet. You know, I've always been like really late to that. So now I see how a lot of people are doing it, and mostly, you know, players in their rooms and that kind of stuff. And people who don't seem to play live, or if they do, I'm not sure, you know, that doesn't seem to be the focus. It mostly seems to be, you know, musician playing in a room like this and just consistently putting up stuff. For me to say like, you should really get out there and, you know, slug it out. I don't know. Maybe that's not the answer for certain people anymore. I still think that the value though, you can't you can't teach that. I think you really have to experience it. And you know this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you were probably out there doing the same thing by your late teens, right?
Yeah, I was gigging when I probably my first gig, I guess, was around 14 or 15 years old.
Yeah.
I finally met some guys, local dudes in bands and stuff, and started joining them and playing cover tunes and stuff. Yeah. So I got out there as quickly as I could.
Yeah.
I didn't have anybody else to play with until that point. So, that's when I jumped off and did it. Yeah, and I agree with you, man. I think it's super important for musicians to get out and interact with other musicians. You
Yeah.
got to get out of that. It's my opinion. You got to get out of the room. The influencer culture has really changed. It's great that you can make a living and do this kind of stuff while you're in this room. I appreciate that fact, but if you want to be able to converse musically with other people, you got to get with the other people and figure that out, right?
I think there's a comfort zone thing too. Like, obviously you can curate the perfect take when you're at home.
Oh yeah.
You're doing it a million times over, and you sort of micro analyze every single thing that you're doing. You can't do that when you play live.
No.
You have one shot every time you play a gig. And I think maybe to people who have never experienced that before, there might be a bit of terror in considering the possibility that you're going to reach for that thing and you're not going to quite get it.
Right.
But then the beauty is that it disappears and you get to do it again. And there's people there to receive it and give it back to you. And it's, there's so much more, to me, more joy in it, the communal experience of music, as opposed to sort of making it in isolation and then waiting around for the comments section, which is completely skewed and a whole other thing.
I know. Crazy. So, okay, let's move on a little bit here. And correct me if I'm wrong here, knowing you as long as I've known you, you went down a path of trying to be and you are, but a solo artist, making your own music, a lot of original music. Obviously, you played in bands and stuff while you were doing that, but you sort of seemed like to me you chose that path of trying to make your own music, put out your own records and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and you've done that to a really high degree, and excellent music. What was the emotional side of that kind of stuff? Trying to make your way, get people to recognize what you do. Talk a little bit about that journey of trying to be a solo artist.
Yeah. So, well, I'll just pick up the story. So, I mean, out of doing all the cover band stuff, it was sort of like, okay, kid, you should probably start thinking about writing your own stuff. And I didn't sing at that point. I was just a guitar player. And I started dabbling with other instruments as well. Like I would show up to like a, sound check or whatever. And, hey, can I get behind the drums? And, I was just curious about everything, but singing, definitely not. Like I was just like scared of it. And so my earlier writing was just instrumental stuff. And having grown up with Joe Satriani and Eric Johnson, all that kind of stuff, that was the direction I started in as a solo artist. And I made a couple of instrumental records. And there were cover tunes on there. We did like Freeway Jam and a Gary Moore song. And, I would just try to cop that feel, everything. And then things shifted when I finally started singing around, I think I was 15. I took some vocal lessons just to kind of get started, basically. And then I was more or less off and running, trying to write, songs with my own lyrics and my own melodies and that kind of thing. I had a trio for about 3 years, and we never made an official record, but we made an album's worth of, let's call them demos, that we would sell at shows, little 3-song, 4-song, burn your own disc and stick on the label kind of thing. So it all sounds so romantic now. So yeah, I mean, emotionally out of high school, I did have like a moment of crisis because all my friends were going to college, and I had sort of made the decision that I would just kind of keep at it and stick it out as a working musician. And at that point, I didn't really have anything going on original music wise. I kind of got sucked into the just, play around town, solo, duo gigs and, make your couple $100 and start, paying bills, the responsible shift into adulthood. And there was a moment there where I actually thought, I maybe this isn't going to work out. I still want to be involved in music, but maybe the whole artist path isn't going to be the thing. So I briefly considered trying to like sort of be on the other side of the glass and learn some engineering skills. And so I took these Pro Tools courses, and I very quickly realized like, nah, I think I have to be a musician. But I'm super glad I did that, because that's what set me up to the point where you and I meet, which, you know, when I reached out to you, that would have been like somewhere around the summer or so, or maybe fall of 2009. Uh, that was like it was like a neutral point. I had moved away from my hometown for a year, didn't really get anything happening, moved back, got this apartment, and I started building, you know, a little home studio setup for the first time. And I hadn't written anything in a while. And I was just trying to exercise that feeling of, let me just write whatever I feel like writing. You know, new influences had come into my life over the past couple of years, and I didn't even know what I was trying to do anymore as an artist. So I just started writing this stuff, and I was having fun playing everything, and just kind of like hearing new things happen. And then I reached a point where I was like, I some tune was too hard for me to play drums on or something. And I remember sort of like really thinking about like, man, who would be like great for this? And I didn't know anybody. And then, you know, I was a fan of your work. And I remember going to your website and seeing that you had like a contact email. I was like, okay, well, I'll give this a shot. I'd probably be horrified to see whatever email I sent you initially.
Yeah.
But you know, you got back to me, you were receptive and said, hey, you know, send me the song, and if it's something that you know, basically you could see yourself playing on, you know, we'll continue the conversation. And it kind of, you know, just continued from there. And you would have to tell me how you received it, but from my perspective, it obviously went well. And I kept sending you songs, and you ended up basically playing on this entire record, aside from like 2 drum tracks that I kept of my own. And this was all through email. And then eventually we got on the phone, and truly, man, you were the one. You were like, what are you gonna do with this? And I didn't have an answer. It was because I was, you know, I was investing in the project, but it was really at that point still just for me to hear it. Like I was willing to pay, you know, musicians in production and all this kind of stuff simply to just hear this creation come back to me in a heightened way. I just wanted to make something good.
Right.
And then you were the one who were kind of like, well, you know, this is good stuff. You should do something with it. And that was kind of the start of like the next part of my artistic life. And that's, to me, that's really where like my me kind of begins, you know, awesome. Age 21, 22.
Right. Very cool. Now, yeah. I'm going to take a quick left turn here because I'd like to come back to this a little bit later as well. But this whole time you were with Michelle, your wife. You've been with her for a long time now, right?
Almost 20 years.
Almost 20 years now. And she was around your early days, seeing you grow as a musician and as a human being and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
How was it for the two of you when you were at this early stage? Maybe like, you know, you said you were struggling a little bit, you moved out and you moved back and you did this, then you hadn't written in a while. How did that affect your personal relationship at all with her? And was she always supportive of you and your music vision and your music dream?
Always supportive, 1000%. But we were still kids, you know. I mean, we met in high school. She's just under 2 years younger than me, which back when you're young, that seems like eternity, you know. So we met during the summer transition for me from 11th to 12th grade, and she was going into 10th grade. And yeah, I mean, she saw the whole thing really, and moving away was hard. Early relationship, because are we going to stay together? I mean,
Right.
when you're kids, you even think, because we went to high schools that were just bordering towns basically, but we didn't go to the same high school. And remember summer ending, like, are we still going to be boyfriend and girlfriend? It's so innocent. So all of these steps along the way. So like moving away for a year, and I would come back, like a week of every month, and basically like play a bunch of gigs and then make my rent money. So yeah, I mean, she's always been supportive, and I definitely could not have done it still to this day. Not only without her support, but like just the overall understanding that there's gonna be this constantly. There's always the hope that it's gonna sort of even out and get to some consistent place. And I do think it is. I mean, it's always been on like a steady incline. There was never like a super low point, if I really think about it. There were certainly moments though where I felt like I was hitting some sort of bottom. It's like nobody's calling, there's no gigs. What am I doing? All the usual stuff. But no, she's never wavered. And if anything, she's been a good, in a good way, kicking the ass every once in a while when I get too complacent or too like, oh, I don't think anybody likes my, that kind of stuff. She's always there to kind of say like, no, you're doing great work. Like, you got to keep doing it.
That's amazing. That's really great. It's incredibly helpful to have somebody behind you that
Absolutely
wants you to do it.
And thankfully I can point.
And it's always, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I can point to all of these things along the way as, great signs of progress.
Sure.
There's always been enough going on, since my early 20s or whatever, that you'd say like, look, this can happen. We can do this. And she gets to reap the benefits of the occasional tours and the culture, and getting to just be a part of that life as well, with me and with other people out there in the world, so it's great.
And it's also helpful, from what I know of Michelle, that she's not, when you're with somebody who's not a musician and not in the music business, or had, a totally different realm of life, it's sometimes difficult for that person to get what it's like to be a musician. And, the temptations and all the stuff that kind of comes with being a musician and the lifestyle. Even though you could be the most innocent person in the world, it still might be difficult for that other person to kind of get it. So it seems like Michelle has had a lot of good patience and never doubted your dream.
No, for sure. Yeah, no, she's always kind of seen that for me.
That's great.
So yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
So I got to ask, since you said, there was a couple of low points, never really hit a serious rock bottom, which is great. But during those low points, and I think this is great information for other people who may have, because we all go through it, but how did you deal with some of those low points? What did you do to get out of those funks? Or was there ever a point where, I mean, I know you said there was some, you may have thought of doing something else, but how did you deal with those points when it was dry, especially early on, and things weren't happening like you wanted them to? How'd you get through it?
Well, I mean, most of the stress, without a doubt, is just, it's a financial stress.
Of course. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I know.
I've never been worried about like creativity or any of that kind of stuff. It was always, I want to make great stuff, or at least as great as I can make it, for me. And I don't want to cut corners on quality, all that, which always means investing in it, investing in gear, investing in production, investing in musicians, whatever that would take to service the vision. And so, okay, how to make that happen? And there are only so many levers I could pull on as a musician, booking cover gigs, like the kind of soulless, soul sucking stuff after a while that you're like, if I have to do this one more time,
Yeah.
you know, and I would start to shift mentally to this place of like, is there something else I can do for money? It would always go away from the art and more towards the pragmatic side. I know that I have this talent or these abilities. Should I be using those to service something else in the industry so that I can make money and all that kind of stuff? Which is it's a human thing. Everybody goes through it, obviously. From a privileged seat of not having a family or anything, it meant that I could kind of just weather the storm and just kind of just eke it out,
Right.
just have enough money and, pray that when I hand over my card to somebody at the checkout line, it doesn't say declined, but that stress obviously builds up, and it's a tough thing to deal with, and obviously at a lot of points, most people, they have to get away from that and say like, I got to do something healthier or more consistent, that kind of thing. But overall, I would always come back to this thing of like, I just knew that when I was really focused on my work and meeting new people and new musicians and getting to sort of present it to people, that in its own time, it seemed to open up doors. Like I said, you were the first person to sort of open that door, and then through you, other people that would kind of come in to the fold. Gavin Harrison would be another one. I mean, amazing to think that like this sort of chance meeting that I like randomly met him in the street one day. It was like just crazy. Like in LA, I was visiting my cousin and walking around, and I was like, that's Gavin Harrison. And then I saw him again like a couple days later at the NAMM show, because that's actually why we were in town. But long story short, like that was another situation where it was like, I really love this guy's playing. I have this song I think he'd be great for. Similar kind of deal. Send it to me. Let's see what you think. And, you know, over 10 years later, he's calling me to see if I want to join Porcupine Tree. It's so these kind of seeds that you don't even realize are being planted naturally. I never tried to meet somebody just to meet them and be like, oh, maybe they can do something for me. It was always coming from a place of, I admire this person's talents. I would love to get to know them as musicians and hear them contribute to my stuff. And in the internet era, the best thing I can say is that it's made that possible, to actually work with people from all over the world. And if you're lucky, eventually, like, make music in a room together or on a stage together.
Sure.
Yeah. So I don't know, weathering the storms. It's easier said than done. That's for sure. I think you got to really be able to take a lot of punches. And
thick skin is a part of being a musician. I think, you gotta be able to wake up the next day and try and clear your mind and go and move forward. But I understand. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, really, the only way I forget where I heard this line, but I really believe it now, especially at my age. Is like the only way you really fail at anything is if you quit.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, get it wrong a million times over, but that's not really failure. That's just trying, I think. But if you totally give up, that's failure. So I think it's a matter of just keeping the gas, your foot on the gas, no matter if it's, going 2 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour.
That's right. Yeah. And it's tough too. I mean, because let's face it, like so many people have, variations of the dream, whatever that dream is. If it's playing Madison Square Garden, or if it's just having 10 people show up to your gig, town. And there is a fine line between like am I delusional, or do I have to just keep being confident that it's gonna work out? And that's where I would say, like, just those little signs, or those like gifts almost from the universe, that could just be like an email from somebody that you weren't expecting.
Right.
Like, hey man, I heard your work. It's really great. Like, oh, okay, somebody's listening. I got to keep going.
Right.
No, not because you're doing it to only be heard by other people, but I think it's got to start with something that you want to exist.
Yeah.
And then naturally you want to share that with people and say, like, hey, I think this is good. I think other people would like it too.
Nice. Well, let's jump forward now. So
Yeah.
from those early days to sort of around now, you've really stepped up your game and things have started to happen for you. Totally deserved, a million
Thank you.
times over. But you're doing the opening sets for Pineapple Thief through Gavin, right? That relationship really started bearing fruit for you, and got into did the Porcupine Tree tour, and which was awesome, totally killing it in that gig. And then there's future things that might be happening as well. So all through these relationships. So now you're in a different league, dealing with like a sort of a real pro high end thing, doing big gigs and lights and traveling around the world and all that kind of stuff. Do you deal with those musicians, the other players, management, that kind of stuff in a different way than when you were younger? Have you learned how to deal with people in that level of the game indifferently, or is it just the same? They're just people are people. How's that worked for you?
I think the whole transition through all of this has felt very natural. That's one benefit I have to say for me, of the sort of slow burn, as opposed to like just some, like, huge rise.
Right.
It's always been a slow but steady climb, and there's been different experiences along the way that have set me up for situations, so that when these bigger things have happened, they haven't been like a complete shock to the system. I've had some sort of precursor to that experience. But there's no doubt that with Porcupine Tree in particular, there was a much a heightened sense of responsibility. I'm going to be coming into this band that has been away for a long time. A lot of people love this band. There's going to be a huge push for this kind of new record, new tour, new lineup. And, there's going to be a lot of skepticism out there from people who were in love with a prior incarnation of who they're used to seeing on stage. So all of those things definitely added to the feeling of, like, I really got to get this right. Because I'm feeling it from all sides. Obviously I'm being asked to do this. It means that I'm being trusted with this responsibility, and I want to follow through. I want to over deliver if I can, whatever that may be. And I just really got to work on just the most micro details of everything, to just really, as much as I could, dial it in, so that, like, the moment we stepped into a rehearsal for the first time, could hopefully, just ease everything and get that sense that everything was going to work very well. And I remember we did, because it was a crazy time in particular, because nobody knew that I had this gig, yourself included. We were getting ready to do some gigs with my McStine and Miniman project, which you were a part of, for Cruise to the Edge, this really cool festival. And, like, that's really complex music. But like 2 weeks before, I was secretly in the UK doing these rehearsals,
Right.
For like 5-6 days. But I remember getting to the end of that rehearsal week, and we sat down with, like, the tour manager to start mapping out, future tour rehearsals. And the guys were like, yep, we're not going to need X amount of days like we thought we would. I was like, that's it. Like, we've exceeded, the expectations, and this is going to really work, and it's going to go smooth. So, but but yeah, I guess to your original point, like there's definitely that sense of, you want to be careful with how you word things. You don't, I'm always afraid of being misunderstood, like just in general.
Right.
So if I'm drafting an email to management or whoever it is, I'm like really checking it over. Like, let's make sure that I'm very clear, very to the point. I've gotten things down so it's not so long-winded anymore. You can say a lot more with less and all that kind of stuff. But no, I feel good, and I've always just been, just try to be a good communicator and open to ideas and and emotionally level, because I've had to deal with a lot of personality types in my life over the years, and some extreme ones, and you have to like really figure out how you're gonna deal with that. So I feel somewhat inoculated to, you know, difficult personalities. And thankfully, though, I don't really find myself having to deal with that too much. And if I do, I think I have a good way of kind of neutralizing a situation.
Well, to me, that's lots of really great advice there you just gave in that snippet, what you just said, from uh, being very specific in your emails and not being long-winded to learning how to deal with people and saying the right thing. And then I love the fact that you said you went into those first rehearsals with the mentality of over delivering.
That's the intention. Yeah.
The intention of over delivering. And that, that solidified the deal, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure that's like that for a lot of people. I've had that same mentality, thankfully, and it's helped me in many situations. So I think any musician, you're going into something new. If you really want it, you gotta be ready and
Yeah,
take
you gotta be
time.
ready,
Yeah.
show that you want it, and that you're invested in it, and that it isn't just some other gig that you got. You
Right.
know, it's
Totally.
like I'm really here, I'm present, and I'm just gonna be in this role. So let's do it. Let's do this thing.
Killer, man. So last couple of things here. So now let's get back to your personal relationship for just a second. So you've achieved this level of success now, these bigger things, and Michelle has been with you the whole time, and she's been a supporter of you, I'm sure, in the down times and financially and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What's it like for the two of you now when you go to a big gig and she sees you at freaking Radio City Music Hall doing this thing, and it's like is it exciting? How has that been for the two of you?
Yeah. Well, man, when you just said that, I got a little weepy. Yeah, the whole thing's a trip. Um, because I mean, like with them in particular, I mean, we saw them together like play live in, 2008 or whatever it was. So you find that there are these personal connections and how things kind of come full circle in ways that you could have never expected. But yeah, I mean, look, I love the fact that uh like last summer was a European kind of festival run, and I could say, come over to Germany for a few days. Like let's hang out. Let's explore this place. That's just stuff, especially coming from the kind of small upstate New York place that we come from. I'm sure there are plenty of people where we live who go out and do great things, but like it's not something, especially as a musician, that really seems possible. And so to kind of start here and get to go out there in the world, and at this phase of our lives, we actually chose to move back to where we grew up, and literally in the house that Michelle grew up in. It's it's a really it's a really interesting feeling, because there's a part of me that almost feels like I've never left, and it almost all seems like it's a bit of a dream, when I'm just here hanging out. But then there's this whole other life that's going on, and I love being able to, tell her in the morning, hey, I'm going to be going here and here, and this is going to be happening in the fall, and we get to, obviously there's time apart, and this just as much, if not more, I would say more than myself, just because of your experience and being a dad and all of that. it's difficult to be away for stretches of time, but I think you get better at it, and you are working together, whether you're together or apart, to make things happen. And it's obviously super important to be present when you're home. And coming off of a tour, I always find like is very difficult for a few days to sort of adjust from this super heightened form of life that you're living.
Yeah.
And then you're like, yeah, I'm the guy who cleans the litter box. It's time to go do that.
Oh, yeah. Reality hits fast.
Yeah. But it's good. I mean, I'm happy to be grounded. I do think that you could totally get lost in that sort of fantasy world. And I guess it works for some people, but I like being able to kind of come back and chill out and kind of just sink into real life for a little while.
Yeah.
And then go back out there and do it again.
Definitely. Well, dude, thanks so much for all of this stuff. I mean, I thought there's a lot of great stories here and a lot of great wisdom, I think, for anybody who wants to do this for a living. I just want to reach out to anybody that's music is their life, whatever level that is, because there's a lot of ways to be a musician. It's not all, doesn't all have to be rock stardom.
No.
Even though that's the fantasy of a lot of us have, but there's other ways to do it. And I just want to talk to musicians about what it's like what their journey is like and how to relay some of these life hacks and some of this wisdom onto other people. Hopefully make it easier, just to see how other people do it and maybe figure out ways to get through whatever thing you're going through at the time. So I appreciate all your insight.
No, absolutely, man. It's an honor. Obviously we've been friends for, almost 15 years now. And, on a personal note, that is a huge thing that we've gone through a lot of life events together, and also just, that communication of constantly checking in and when things are either up or down, how to get through those things, and the fact that you're doing this and trying to relay that information, and that I could possibly be somebody who can also, share some wisdom. It is sort of like the moment of realizing, like, yeah, I've been doing this for a while, and I do have some pretty radical experiences through it all, or unconventional upbringing and all of that. So it's cool. Yeah. It's nice to know that this will reach somebody.
You bet. Well, thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Give my best to Michelle, and I will let you know when this goes live. And just thanks for joining me on my podcast, man.
Man, talk to you soon.
All right, bud. And what'd you think? Randy is a super personable guy, very well spoken, and he's a deep thinker as well. We've had many conversations after a number of glasses of wine, after a session or a gig, or just hanging at my house talking about all kinds of things. And he knows how to let it all out sometimes, and he's just a great person to hang with. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Again, thank you for watching or listening on YouTube or on the podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Spotify. And I ask you to join me again in a couple of weeks for the next episode of So You Want to Be a Musician. Cheers, everybody.